Hey everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. So, the activities we did in class today were all regarding this concept of social influence. How do the attitudes, beliefs, decisions, and actions of the people around us influence the way we feel and what we do? So, this cartoon is a nice example of that tension. You want to be an individual, so you conform to the people around you. That oxymoron maybe identifies adolescence. So let's review for a moment some of these concepts of conformity and obedience. So social psychologists have theorized that we are natural mimics. This is the chameleon effect. We unconsciously mimic others' expressions, postures, voice tones, and they help us feel what we're feeling. Think about the mirror neurons we learned about way back in the biology unit. This explains the contagious nature of yawning. Empathetic people yawn more after seeing others yawn. So Chartrand and Barg created this experiment where they had a Confederate working alongside other students in a room. And sometimes the Confederates would rub their face, other times they shook their foot. Participants of this study tended to rub their own face when they were with the face rubbing person, the Confederate, and participants tended to shake their own foot when they were with the foot shaking Confederate. This small controlled study gives us a lot of information about much bigger, heavier issues. Think back to earlier units, the learning unit, when we talked about modeling behavior and we talked about copycat behavior. After the Columbine shooting, there were many, many, many copycats. And every time there's that kind of a shooting, there's that concern. And really, you can explain that from this chameleon effect. And let's review Ash's conformity experiment. I have uploaded the link to that video so you can watch that again if you can't quite remember. So Ash's experiments demonstrated some important things about group pressure. When these experiments when the questions about the length of the line were done alone, people erred less than 1% of the time. When several other people were with the individual tended to conform with the group, even though it was the wrong answer, rather than suffer that tension or that awkwardness, being the oddball of saying what they believe was the correct answer, but different from the rest of the group. According to Ash, more than 1/3 of the time, these intelligent and well-meaning college student participants were then, quote, willing to call white black by going along with the group. So it demonstrates something quite interesting about group conformity. Now, when the participant was given just one person that agreed with the participant was much more likely to tell the truth, to say what they believed was the correct answer. Now think about the activity we did in class yesterday, across the line. This activity for some of you, if when you had to walk across the line was always when you were part of a group, the activity was probably quite easy for you. It's very easy to conform to a group. If you were one of the individuals who were alone, you may have felt very, very differently than individuals that were moving as a group, because you by yourself had to make the decision whether you're going to tell the group this information by your actions, or if you're going to withhold the information from your group. And then you had to make the decision if you want to walk by yourself across the line, or you're just going to stay with the group. So this is another example of group conformity. So here are the key things that are known about conformity today. I'll let you read those to yourself. So we've described what conformity is. Now, why do people do this? Now, frequently it's because of normative social influence. Basically, that means it's to avoid rejection or gain social approval. And another reason is for information, because of informative social influence. Groups do provide valuable information, and so as an individual seeing the information that a group is providing, that's a good thing. You're only a very stubborn person is the person who's not going to listen to others and change their behavior. There was a woman named Rebecca Denton who actually drove 30 miles on a British highway on the wrong side of the road. Finally, police were able to puncture her tires, which made her stop. And you wonder, like, what's going on here? Is she running away from the cops. Why would someone do that? Her answer was that she thought the hundreds of other drivers that were coming at her were all on the wrong side of the road. Clearly, if you're going to be that stubborn person, it's not going to help you later on in life. And then we have this concept of obedience, and Stanley Milgram has the most famous obedience studies. We did watch this one briefly in Try 1, looking at experimental ethics, but I've uploaded a very short clip of this study for you to review as well. So participants agreed to this study, and they thought that they were randomly chosen to either be a teacher or a student. In reality, it was rigged, so the participant was always the teacher, and the student was always a Confederate. So the task of the teacher was to teach and then test the learner on a pair of word pairs. Now, if the learner got it wrong, you, as the teacher, you would punish the learner by delivering brief electrical shocks. Now, these shocks range from very slight all the way to intense, very severe, and actually deadly. After each error, the participant or the teacher would move up to the next higher voltage. Milgram found some incredibly surprising results. The majority of teachers in this study, over 60%, continued to obey the instructions all the way to the end. So they continued to administer deadly or voltage up to the deadly level, up to theoretically killing the student in the study. So Milgram found that obedience is highest when the person giving the orders is close at hand and is perceived to be a legitimate authority figure. Now, in this study, the person was simply sitting next to the teacher of the study, and that authority figure was simply saying you should continue with the experiment. But that was enough for this person to be an authority figure. Milgram also found that obedience was highest when the authority figure was supported by a prestigious university. In this study, he used Yale University. And if the victim was depersonalized or at a distance, so in another room, obedience was much higher. If the teacher in the study had to be in the same room with the student, the teacher was much less likely to obey. Obedience was highest when there were no role models for defiance. So when no other participants were seen disobeying the experimenter, people were much more likely. So this study really helps us to understand some of the atrocities that have been committed historically. If you look at the stories of people who complied with orders to carry out the Holocaust atrocities and those who didn't, this concept of obedience is very important. Milgram said that the most fundamental lesson of our study is that ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. And consider also that he used the foot in the door effect, starting small and then growing, as his way of getting people to do what he wanted them to do. So the small action became justified, making the next act tolerable. This is important because if we look at the people who resisted, this also gives us a lot of information. People who resisted usually did so early. After the first acts of compliance or resistance, attitudes begin to follow and justify the behavior. What's also amazing here is the power of the individual. A third of the individuals in his study resisted this coercion, and if we look back on history, we see just even one unarmed individual can single-handedly challenge something. If we look at the history of like Tiananmen Square, or you think of an individual like Gandhi and what he was able to do just by himself resisting. So here's a summary. And next we move to group influence. So let's start with performance. What affects your best performance? How do people around you affect your performance? Well, there's something called social facilitation. And basically this says that we do better when we're in the presence of others. But what's important about this theory is that we have to be doing a task that is easy or that we have confidence in. So this explains why most world records are done in the presence of others at the Olympics, at World Championships. Very few runners are going to get their very best time, their personal record, when they're just running by themselves on the track. They're not competing against anyone. Think about that for you if you compete in athletics or even if you compete in speech. Many of us do better when we've got others around us. There's even been a study about traffic at a stoplight. After a light turns green, drivers take about 15% less time to travel the first 100 yards when another car is beside them at the intersection than if they're alone. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, I do awful when people are watching me. Yeah, that would be me trying to play golf. If the task is difficult for you or you're just not very good at it, you are most likely to perform worse in front of a group. So that's called social impairment. Social facilitation says that you're going to do better at a task that you're good at or that's easy, and social impairment states that you're going to do worse in front of a group if it's a task you're not very confident in. A great example of this was when I was coaching a while ago. We had a wonderful athlete, but she had very little confidence in herself. We had a very big game at the state tournament. We were playing, if we won, we would go to the championship game. And this athlete, who was our go-to athlete, really, she saw the crowd around her. Our entire school was there, it appeared, and the opponent's school was there. It was very full of people. They were chanting, they were yelling, and this athlete performed very, very poorly. She cracked. And that's just an excellent example of social impairment. Because of that crowd, that individual didn't have confidence in herself from the beginning, and she performed even worse. And back to me golfing, same kind of thing. I'm a horrible golfer. I don't mind being outside. Golf is a really fun thing. I'm okay if I'm alone. I like to go to a course where there's not a lot of people, but honestly, I'm horrible. So if I'm at a really nice course, if there's a crowd behind me, I'm awful. The anxiety arises. And this is thinking back to the emotion unit. This is that state of arousal. So you're looking for the optimum state of arousal. And if you are feeling a great amount of stress to perform a task, you're not going to do very well in front of a group. And then we have social loafing. We talked about this today in class. And another thing that's important is something called de-individuation, the loss of self-awareness and self-restraint in group situations that foster arousal and anonymity. And really think about mob behavior, or just think about here at Blaine High School. Some people act totally responsible, make good decisions, and then there are times when there's large crowds and people lose their sense of self. They do things they would never do by themselves. And then another new term that we have is group polarization. And really, when I think of this one, it's very similar to that belief perseverance that we talked about a couple of units ago. So when you are with like-minded individuals, that tends to strengthen your pre-existing attitudes. And a lot of the research today is really dealing with the online world and how you can be part of a group network, particularly these more high prejudice groups, and it allows them to have even stronger, more polarized views because they're with like-minded individuals. So here's a recap from groupthink, and here's some good historical examples of how groupthink has really led to failures. Looking at what we've done in history, interesting things for you to look up in your textbook or to Google. And looking at our list, we're just about through the elements of social psychology. That's all for this video.